Chapter 2, Culture and Human Nature. Uh, Another Asian themed PowerPoint. This should be interesting. We'll see where this goes. Maybe. There we go. Humans are quite particular about whom they choose to imitate. Humans are said to have prestige bias. They're especially concerned with detecting who has prestige. That is, they seek others who have skills and are respected by others, and they try to imitate what these individuals are doing. If you don't believe in imitation, um, let me show you a little bit of mimicry here. These are four people. They look like the same person. It's supposed to be Dolly Parton. They're supposed to look like Dolly Parton. There's a bunch of Elvis impersonators. Um, we choose who it is that we want to look like. So if you stop right now and look at the clothes that you're wearing, why do you wear the clothes that you're wearing? Who is it that you first saw in clothes very similar to yours that you wanted to imitate? Maybe it was a parent, maybe it was a brother or sister, maybe it was a cousin, possibly once upon a time. Once upon a time, Madonna started wearing her underwear on the outside of her other clothes, and all of a sudden we started seeing this more and more. Teenage girls wearing their underwear on the outside of their clothes. About the same era. This is back in the 80s and 90s. There was a singer by the name of Pat Benatar. Pat Benatar had kind of a mullet, I guess, and she was a very attractive Welsh woman and a singer, and she had several hits. And all of a sudden, we saw a lot of Pat Benatar, people with Pat Benatar hairstyles and wearing similar clothes to what she wore. Um, the This idea that boys wear pants that hang down below their hips. Why in the world are there so many people that do that? And it's because they're imitating other individuals' style. Imitating prestigious others is a very efficient way of cultural learning. Individuals are more likely to learn successfully if they target those people who are especially talented. So if you go to church, potentially you act very similarly to what the preacher or holy man, what he or she uh, acts like. So you learn to genuflect if you're Catholic by watching other people genuflect. And here, of course, this little boy. This is a these are Muslims and they are praying, and of course he's learning how to put his forehead on the ground, and that's what you do. That's when they pray 3 times a day. They put their foreheads on the ground and pledge themselves to Allah. Identifying signs of prestige and then imitating people who displayed those signs are skills that were likely selected for in the course of human evolution. Our ancestors who did this were more likely to acquire the highly useful cultural knowledge that gave them a survival advantage compared with those who did not. Humans have what is known as a theory of mind. A theory of mind means that people understand that others have minds that are different from their own, and thus that other people have perspectives and intentions that are different from their own. I know what you're thinking, terrible things about me. Well, screw you and your judgments. And what he was actually thinking about was lemon meringue pie. Imitative learning is where the learner copies precisely what you think that the model is trying to do. Emulative learning is where the learner is focused on the environmental events that are involved. The emulative learner is only focused on the events that happen around the model, not what the model intends to accomplish. In emulative learning, you learn one task but can't use that knowledge in any other context. Human cultural learning is cumulative. So you have two different types, imitative and emulative. Emulative is just for one task. Imitative is where you model somebody else's behavior. Cultural information grows in complexity and often in utility over time. This is called Ratchet Effect. Like a ratchet, it always moves forward and is not allowed to slip backward. Cultural information can continue to accumulate without losing the earlier information. And I've been here. I'm actually reading two books at the same time, and one of the books I'm reading about is called The Temple of the Monkey God. It's about a Honduran archaeological site, and they're trying to determine who the people were at this archaeological site, and how they thought, and whether they were similar to the Maya or the Aztecs or any of the other groups that were in their area. And it seems that their language was very much different. It was a southern language, whereas the Mayan language is north of Honduras, and the Aztec, of course, is in Mexico, which is way far north of Honduras. Anyway, it's really kind of interesting to read and to understand what they think that they were doing, and whether they had accumulated any information. Of course, there was trade going on between all the groups in Central and South America, by many of the groups, maybe not all of them, and there was warfare, potentially warfare that was going on at the same time. But the idea is, did they come up with all these ideas all by themselves? And the answer is probably not. They were trading cultural ideas back and forth, and of course, the assumption is that people don't go backwards. But the reality is there are some instances where people actually do go backwards. To have cumulative cultural evolution, you need creative invention, reliable and faithful social transmission. High fidelity social transmission requires accurate imitative learning and sophisticated communication. One of the things that we know about the people that were in the Southwest, there is one name, and I think it's gone out of favor, but they were referred to as the Anasazi before. We know that these individuals traded with South America because they have they have found South American bird feathers in some of these Anasazi archaeological sites. So they know that there was trading going on in the Americas before pre-Columbian. That's before 1500, before 1492, in essence. There was trade going on between Canada and Louisiana, and the Dakotas. Those areas, they have found they found stone and they found sand from those areas. It can only come from those areas in Louisiana. So why in the world would somebody transport stone all the way from northern Canada, all the way down the Mississippi to Poverty Point? It's an archaeological site in northern Louisiana. But if you look at some of the stones in some of their areas, you see that some of the stones, a large number of stones, actually came from northern Canada. Some came from the Dakotas, some came from Wisconsin, those areas. So we know that there was a lot of trade going on between people of South America, the people of the Americas, people of what would become South America, and people of Central America, and people in what is now North America. So we know that there was transmission of culture taking place between all of these people. No species but humans have seen these capacities, creative invention, and reliable and faithful social transmission. So when something changes, it tends to be passed on from one culture to the next culture. And in that way, of course, there is no culture goes backwards. The larger the group of people, the better cultural information can be maintained and improved upon. You're more likely to encounter a successful model to copy from out of a larger group than out of a smaller group. This can be proven or seen in athletic events. And of course, I'm not saying that everything's athletics, but the back in back before the 1980s, Indiana only had one basketball tournament. And it was everybody played from the smallest school to the largest school, and it was extremely rare for any of the smaller schools to win the state basketball championship. It did happen once in 1954. A very small school, Milan, was able to win the basketball tournament. And of course, that's what Hoosiers is all about. The movie Hoosiers is about Milan actually winning the state basketball championship, despite the fact that they were playing against schools that were 10, 15, 20 times larger than them. And of course, as Americans, we like to see the underdog win. But the reality is, the larger you are, the larger the population, the more likely you're going to find people that are very good at various things. A good example would be the football championship this year was won by Georgia. Georgia is a very large school, um, but if Georgia played against my alma mater, which was Wabash College, Wabash only has 835 students. So what's the probability that tiny Wabash could accumulate um, enough very good football players? 1/8 of the of Wabash's population plays football. If 1/8 of Georgia's population played football, that would mean that there would be 3,000 people playing football on the football team. And at Wabash, of course, it's only about 120 students play football. So as you can see, the probability of cultural information on creativity being greater, that is more likely to happen in a large situation, in a larger population. So it's far more likely that a great masterpiece would be written in New York City, where there are 4 or 5 million people, than in Lost Nation, Iowa, where there's only 800 or 900 people. There will be more innovations that come from a larger group than from a smaller group, so a larger group will be more likely to have at least one person stumble on a good idea. And that's one of the reasons why uh, cultures will have centers of intellectual development. Paris in France, London in England, um, Tokyo in Japan, New York in the United States, Los Angeles in the United States, Chicago in the United States. So the larger the group, the more likely a good idea will come out of that group. And of course, the intellectual elite are drawn to these areas. So our best colleges and universities tend to be around large cities. So the Ivy Leagues are all around in the New York Metroplex, kind of within 200 or 300 miles. Um, Stanford is right outside of San Francisco. Chicago, University of Chicago is another, and Northwestern are in Chicago. So the larger the population, the greater the draw of intellectual capacity comes. Looking at the Polynesians settling the South Pacific, the islands with the largest populations at the time of the first contact had far more different kinds of tools than islands with the smallest populations. Bigger population allowed for more rapid spread of cultural innovations. However, sometimes the ratchet slips and a population will lose ideas. This happened with the Aboriginal population that inhabited Tasmania from the Australian mainland. This is the Australian mainland, and this is Tasmania down here. And as you can see, there is a gulf between the two. So the population of Aborigines, some of the Aborigines from Australia actually went over to Tasmania, and they actually lost some of their cultural knowledge. When Europeans initially arrived in Tasmania, they found scattered foraging bands of humans utilizing the simplest technology. Archaeological digs have shown that the technology seen in their past was far more advanced than what was demonstrated in their current technology. Comparing the Tasmanian Aborigines with those across the Bass Strait in Australia, the Tasmanians maintained a toolkit of only 24 items, whereas the Australians maintained a toolkit of hundreds of items. The Tasmanians had lost bone tools, they'd lost cold weather clothing, they lost fish hooks, and they lost boomerangs. All of that wasn't found on Tasmania, and of course it was on the Australian mainland. Not very much communication going on. The Bass Strait is just too vast for them to navigate this on a frequent basis. Other groups where the ratchet seems to have slipped include the Melanesians of the Torres Islands north of Australia, the reclusive Siriano of Bolivia, the reclusive Paraha of Brazil. So it isn't. It's not an absolute. I'm sorry. It isn't an absolute that the ratchet always moves forward. Sometimes the ratchet slips and people lose knowledge. Humans are a cultural species that exist within worlds consisting of a cultural information that has accumulated over history. Cultural ideas greatly influence the ways that we live our lives, determining much of what we do on a daily basis. We are all born into rich cultural worlds, and we are constantly learning and being influenced by the shared ideas that make up our culture. Our brain size is determined by the encephalization quotient, the ratio of the brain weight of an animal to that predicted by a comparable animal of the same body size. For humans, it is 4.6, or that we have a 4 to 5 times larger brain than another mammal of our size. Only the tiny but big-brained shrew has a higher ratio than humans, and they maintain a brain that accounts for 10% of their body weight. Our brains consume about 16% of our basal metabolism, even though our brains only represent 2% of our body weight. The brain of average mammal only consumes 3% of their basal metabolism. The brain of the marsupial only consumes 1% of their basal metabolism. So the marsupials that, of course, we only have one marsupial in the United States. That's the possum. That's why I'm showing you a picture of the possum. I don't know if you guys have very many of them down in Arizona and New Mexico. But this is a very common animal in the Midwest. It's a cold weather animal, as you can see the snow back here. It's a cold weather animal and not the smartest animal that ever existed. As a matter of fact, last winter we had a family of possums living in our barn, and the dogs got a hold of all the young ones and killed them, but they couldn't get a hold of the mother. She escaped. But she didn't come back, so I'm not sure what happened. Anyway, not the smartest animals in the world. Obviously, they're not the smartest animals in the world. The average mammal consumes about 3% of their basal metabolism, and the marsupial only 1%. In order to maintain the massive human brain, the trade-off was shrinkage in other areas. The chimpanzee's muscles are 27% larger than humans. So A chimpanzee that was the same size as a human, of course, would have much stronger muscles. Our guts, our stomach, and the small and large intestines are 60% smaller than that of the chimpanzee. So if we look at the chimpanzee, he looks like he's all gut. As you can see, a human not has a fairly small gut. So what we did, we traded um, gut, the intestines, the ability to digest just about any food. We traded that off for the large brain. So how in the world did we make up for that? One reason humans are able to reduce their digestive needs is because we are able to learn to do some of our digestion outside our bodies. We learn to cook our food. Cooking substantially increases the amount of energy that can be extracted from food. It denatures protein, it gelatinizes starch. It makes all of our food softer and easier to digest, thus requiring less energy. And that's one of the ways that we reduce the need for the large gut. We started cooking our food. Because of cooking, humans are able to consume foods that cannot be eaten raw. This reduced the amount of chewing necessary to consume food, reducing the amount of muscle required in the human jaw. It also changed the shape of our teeth. We have crushing teeth instead of ripping teeth. We have no ripping teeth at all, but this is what an ape's mouth looks like. As you can see, they grab things with their distended incisors and with these sharp front teeth and rip meat off or rip things up, and then they grind them with their molars. And we have mostly grinding teeth. There's a little. Actually, when I was born, I had distended incisors like this ape. They weren't quite that sharp, and they were certainly not that long. But it was kind of a throwback to humans as, and maybe I'm less evolved than most people, but I had distended incisors to some extent. They weren't very much longer, maybe half an inch, quarter of an inch. But anyway, these eye teeth were distended on me anyway. The average human spends 1 hour chewing their food a day. The average chimpanzee spends 6 hours chewing their food. By cooking our food, we are able to evolve a much smaller digestive tract, which freed up much energy to be used by our brains. For lunch, I had vegetable soup, fresh vegetables, but I cooked them before I ate them. I put them in my soup, and by the time I was done cooking them, they were fairly soft. If I hadn't cooked them, I had radishes, carrots, and a beet, and onions, green onions. I chopped it all up and put it in my soup. By the time I was done cooking, of course, they were fairly soft, and of course, you can imagine how much more chewing it would have taken for the carrots and the radishes and the beet. Uh, as it was, I just pretty much swallowed them right down because they were in such small pieces and they had pretty much turned to mush. Pretty good stuff. Many primates eat a lot of fruit. There are good reasons to eat fruit. Fruit is rich in vitamins, carbohydrates, and calories, and fruits tend to be available in concentrated patches. To live off of a diet of fruit, you need to keep in mind where the various fruit trees are located and when they would likely be bearing ripe fruit. Perhaps the greatest need for a good memory and a big brain was triggered by the need to remember fruit locations. Most fruits are fairly easy to eat. Most of them don't take any cutting through, like the apple. The apple is fairly easy to eat. Strawberries are easy to eat. Cherries. Banana is a manufactured by humans. Pears, kiwi. Of course, that doesn't grow everywhere. I'll tell you what, these grapes are really good. This is a star fruit right here. Anyway, most of those fruits are fairly easy to eat. Most fruits are easy to eat. Those primates that had better skills at remembering where the fruit was would have been more likely to eat well and have surviving offspring than those who were stumbling about aimlessly trying to find ripe pawpaws. And evidently, those are pawpaws. We had pawpaws in Indiana. I'm not a real fan. They're kind of slimy for me. I'm like my fruit a little bit firmer than that. They're kind of like ripe bananas, eating pawpaws. Anyway, a number of primate species rely on food sources that require a fair bit of ingenuity to access them. Some primates' food sources include nuts and seeds encased in hard shells, tubers that need to be dug up, termites that need to be fished out of termite mounds. Extractive food sources, such as the ones just mentioned, are often worth pursuing because they are rich in protein and energy, especially nuts and seeds. Termites, I understand it. I don't eat termites myself. Actually, that's chimpanzees that eat termites, but we do eat tubers. Carrots are tubers, potatoes are tubers. Those primates who were able to extract nutritious foods were more likely to survive and produce viable offspring. Most primates live in complex social groups, maintaining clear power hierarchies, allowing them to form various relationships and alliances. Conflicts, as well as cooperation, nepotism, and reciprocity, are common, and that has to do with the clan system. That's why you have the clan system. It leads to cooperation and reciprocity. I do this for you, you do that for me, and of course, nepotism to advance the group. Humphrey and Dunbar have hypothesized that it was the necessity of to navigate through the intricate and elaborate webs of social relationships, the need to attract a mate, secure resources, and protect themselves and their offspring that led to the development of the big brain. So we need to be smart in order to navigate the social necessities. I, we watch a lot of English television, and evidently England is far more complex than the United States. Of course, they have the royal family is part of the English cultural structure. And there are lots of rules that we don't have in the United States that they follow in England. Who can you talk to? How do you have to talk to this person? You know, those kinds of things. Dunbar analyzed the relationship between neocortex ratio and average group size and estimated that the average size of the human ancestral population was about 147.8 people. Looking at subsistence societies still in existence, Dunbar discovered that the average clan size was about 148.4. In 2011, Facebook did a survey of its accounts and found that the average number of friends that people had was between 120 and 130. And you may see a common thread running here. So if we look at at relationships in neocortex, if we look at human ancestral populations, we can see that we can maintain relationships with about 150 people. Same thing with subsistence societies. Do we have huge cities? No, we have clan sizes. We have villages of about 150 people. Facebook 120 to 130. The same year, Twitter analyzed their accounts and discovered that people could maintain between 100 and 200 interactions. Any groups that are larger than 150 become too unwieldy to manage without some institutional structure. Yet smaller groups lose their advantages of large numbers. So the magic number seems to be 150. Although primates are highly social mammals, in many ways humans can be said to be an ultra-social species. Humans tend to be far more engaged with others around them than do any other primates. We're constantly attending to what others are doing. We gossip about others all the time. Our behaviors are guided a great deal by what others around us are doing. We learn by imitating others. So humans are ultra social. In an experiment by Dean et al. In 2012, the researchers compared the ability of a chimpanzee and an orangutan versus a 2.5-year-old to solve a physical problem and a social problem. The child and the great apes performed equally well on the physical problem at about 75%. However, for the social problem, when the subjects had to follow a model, the 2.5-year-old was more likely to follow precisely what the model did. The great apes tried to solve the social problem through emulation. Most of the humans scored 100% on the social problem, while most of the apes scored 0%. So no matter how reclusive an individual or a group of humans are, culture and the biology of the human brain are bound inextricably. Humans evolved to be a cultural species, and that's one of the reasons why we all paint ourselves blue and go out and have a big dance. And that is the end of the chapter. 150. The magic number is 150. Okay, that's the end of chapter 2. I'll talk to you next week. Have a good week.